Good afternoon. Today I have Tony with me. Hi, Tony. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Tony Kent. I am a writer. I'm also a criminal barrister with a different name, which is my real name. But for today's purposes, I'll be Tony Kent. I'm the writer of a series of books which I think we now say are set in the Killer Intent universe, which is a slightly different way of putting it than a series. The reason for that is that they have several main characters who sort of dip in and out of the books, and therefore the two main characters, Joe Dempsey and Michael Devlin, we can't really call it either of their series because both of them have books they're not in. So I am the author of the 4 books so far that are in the Killer Intent universe. They're about primarily 3 main characters, really. Michael Devlin, who, like me, is a criminal barrister, and unlike me, is a man with a dark past. There is Michael Devlin, who is our James Bond for the 21st century. Joe Dempsey, pardon me, who is our James Bond for the 21st century, an intelligence agent with the United Nations, and Sarah Truman, who is an investigative reporter who, depending on where you are in the books, may or may not be in a relationship with Michael Devlin, but that depends on which book you're reading and where you are in the series. I've got a book coming out this week. I'm not sure when we're going to show this, actually, because I forgot to ask Donna that. But on the 18th of November 2022, we will be releasing the hardback of the 4th in the series, which is No Way to Die. At some point, I'm going to learn how to hold these up in the right way so people can really see them. No Way to Die is a Joe Dempsey thriller set in America, following a domestic terrorist group, a little bit akin to the chaps who decided to invade the Capitol Hill in January of this year, but a whole lot brighter. And they're being brought to justice by Joe Dempsey and his team from the United Nations.
It will go out straight as soon as we finished, just so you know.
Thanks very much.
Did you always know that you wanted to write?
Yeah, I think I did, but I didn't always know I wanted to write books. I see things very visually. I think I've quite a sort of cinematic mindset, and I've been told, and an awful lot of my reviews refer to the books being quite cinematic. A lot of people say about adaptions, but actually a lot of people also say it's like watching a film as you're reading it, which is a massive compliment to me because it's how I like to read. So when I was younger, I used to write ideas for TV shows. I'd come up with ideas for TV shows, less so films, some films, but I had no idea how to write any of these things and would no idea where to start with a script. I don't know anything about putting together a Bible. I know none of these things. Pardon me. But I'd sit down and I would just regurgitate ideas for these TV shows and films. And then when I was 17, I read a book by David Baldacci, who remains my favorite thriller writer, called The Winner. And it was the first time that I'd read a book that was like the stuff that was in my head. I hadn't realized up until that point that you actually could write this stuff or that this stuff existed. I always thought my reading was very much, I used to read a lot of history, a lot of mythology, and a lot of geeky stuff. So in terms of fiction, I'd read what they told me to read in school. So I was reading the classics. And yeah, they're classics for a reason. They're very well written, they're et cetera, et cetera. They're not for me. I didn't really enjoy them. You just have to do it. And then I read this book by David Baldacci and I thought, oh my word, I didn't realize you could do this. And so I read everything he'd written at the point, which was only 4 books. There's lots more now. I read later everything by Lee Child, John Grisham, et cetera, just across the genre. And yeah, so from the moment I read The Winner by David Baldacci, I knew I wanted to write novels. Took a long time to get to it, but I knew I wanted to write novels.
And what was the point? What made you go, I'm going to go for it now, I'm going to do it?
Well, I wanted to think about, I wanted to write something that I would be able to do without too much research, because they always say, write what you know. So I came up with this idea for a criminal barrister with a dark past. And the reason that kind of came about very briefly is I have an older brother. I mentioned to you earlier, Don, I have an older brother who's been in a lot of trouble during his life. In fact, one of the reasons I became a barrister in the first place was having seen a trial that involved him. And I met somebody shortly as I was studying to be a barrister who said to me, oh, imagine you're going to go and become a barrister. You've done so well because you come from a family of villains, which is wholly untrue. I don't. I just have a brother who was a petty thief. But, people like to exaggerate things. And who am I to who am I to say anything about that, being a writer and doing what I do for a living? However, what that did was sort of triggered something, triggered an idea, and the idea was Michael Devlin. And I went home. I was 22. I was about to start my pupillage, which is the apprentice stage of being a barrister. I went home. I wrote the first 4 chapters of what became Killer Intent, and then I started my pupillage, and I didn't touch it again for another 10 years because I hadn't really taken into account just how much work you have to do when you begin a legal career if you want to be successful. And I was lucky enough to be taken into the top chambers in the country, and it just kind of flew in terms of a legal career. I went from there to there in less than a year. And after that, you're on the conveyor belt, you're on a roller coaster, and there's no getting off. And so I didn't get back to it for 10 years, but I always thought about it. I kept thinking about it. I kept reading, kept thinking and thinking and thinking. And tellingly, I mean, we all know how quickly technology passes. And these days, weirdly enough, because we've got iPhones and we've got iPads and all these things, we keep our computers longer than we used to, because actually the computers themselves aren't improving that quickly. Yeah, they've hit a point where they need to improve because other technology is improving. But back then, I first wrote the first 4 chapters on this massive, big thing that sort of took a big, strong bodybuilder to lift, with 5 different component parts. And then obviously over 10 years, that got smaller and smaller and smaller, and it ended up being a laptop, ended up being an iMac or whatever they're called, an iPad, sorry, MacBook. And yet, so having gone through sort of 5 or 6 computers in that 10-year period, I always kept the one that I'd written on, and I kept it in the back of the cupboard, and I'd move house and it'd come with me. So I knew I didn't want to lose what I'd written. I knew I had to get back to it at some point. And as I approached, as I passed 30, I just started thinking about it more and more and more. And then an opportunity arose. I had a trial in which I was playing a very, very minor part right at the back. And it was a 3-month trial of which I had about 3 days of speaking to do. And literally nothing else affected me. My client was so isolated from the rest that the 3 months of the rest of the evidence just didn't matter to him. And so I thought, well, let's give it a go. So I got the computer, got the file converted down onto a floppy disk, and then from a floppy disk onto a CD-ROM. I mean, this is all so old, isn't it? And then on from a CD-ROM to a USB. And I think there's only way. I think you have to go through that whole step process because there's no overlap between the things. And yeah, got it on the laptop and sat in the Old Bailey for 3 months writing Killer Intent. And then once I started writing it and really going for it, I caught the bug in a way that is just completely life-changing. And it was life-changing because it made me make a huge career choice so that I'd have time to write. And it was life-changing, but it was also necessary because I just got to a point where I had to do it. And thankfully that stayed with me.
On just a random side note, one of the most depressing memes I think I've seen is young people when they see a floppy disk send it with 3D printed to save icon, which is just it's just very depressing.
It is. Aging's rubbish, isn't it? Yeah. I hadn't realized that I was aging for a long time, and then I saw a picture of myself and it's like, oh my god, who's that? And then you realize that all this time has passed and it's just rubbish. I'm not going to get depressing about it. It's life, and it is what it is. And as long as you stay young in your mind, it doesn't really matter that much. But occasionally you get reminded. I mean, if I were to go back to Killer Intent, my first draft of Killer Intent, those first 4 chapters, there's almost no texting, there's no WhatsApp, there's some mobile phones, but they're certainly not proper ones. And you just think that's a different world, isn't it? Makes me want to write a period piece.
Yeah, I know. I mean, in my head, I'm still 18 or whatever. It's only when I went back to uni as a mature student and my fellow students are pretty much half my age. I'm like, yeah, I'm not young anymore. Not at all. I don't even understand what they're talking about.
Well, also, the cultural shift in the last 10 years is enormous. I don't know how old you are, Donna, but I'm 43. And the cultural shift between 40 and 20 or 40 and 25, oh my, it's like a different world. In a way that it never was before. I mean, we all look at our parents and think they're a bit too racist or a bit too sexist or whatever. But that sort of, there seems to be some sort of Rubicon that got crossed. And I don't want to go into a whole wokeness thing, because, you know, it's debatable if wokeness is even a thing or it exists. But there has been a cultural change, and I think that that almost any of us, no matter how enlightened we might consider ourselves to be, if we were to go back to university now, we would have to shut up in most debates, because we'd be shut down so very, very quickly. I mean, I sit in court with barristers a generation younger than me, and I'm just sort of baffled by the things that can and can't be said. I mean, what I do for a living in a day job, it requires an incredibly thick skin, or you would think, because it's combative. It's combative. You are in battle to a certain extent. And you'd think that that requires a thick skin. However, without being rude, a lot of people the generation younger, even in that job, don't seem to have that thick skin. It's sort of, well, I'm offended now. It's like, well, be offended. But you being offended isn't the end of the world. It's fine to be offended. We've all got a right to be offended, but we also all have a right to offend, and a right to say what we think without, we don't have to all hate each other just because we don't agree on everything. And that's where I would struggle, I think, is going somewhere where it used to be debate is how you learn. Debate is how you make things better. Debate is how you take people who think the wrong way and maybe make them think less the wrong way. You don't do that by saying, shut up, you are no platformed, you can't speak. You don't do that by saying to Germaine Greer, for example, you are anti-feminist. The proto-feminist is apparently anti-feminist because on a couple of things, she doesn't agree with what a small amount of people, but very vocal amount of people, insist that she must. It's interesting. I mean, it's very, very interesting. And you can come down either side of the debate, but I just think that it's gone so far that if I was to go, I mean, I would not survive a week if I were to go back to university, because I'm not particularly good at not saying what I think. And I know that what I think, whilst I don't think it's wrong, would be regarded as being utterly unacceptable.
Yeah, I've learned just to listen. Even if I don't understand what they're talking about, I just listen. And then,
are you at university now still?
Yeah, only because I failed a unit twice. So I'll be taking it. Forensic science.
Forensic science. Oh, I did a forensic. Was it forensic science? I did. Does that involve dead bodies?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
I did that in my second year of university. I was very excited to go and do it. Really, yes, it's going to be that. Yeah, it's going to be. I'm going to see the dead bodies, etc., etc. Because when you're a 19-year-old boy, that's the kind of thing that you think is cool. And I remember being in a room, and I was the heavyweight British Universities boxing champion at the time, British, Scottish, British, and Irish. I basically was all of the different things champion, and I was playing a lot of rugby, and I was therefore the epitome of. I was 6'2" and about 16 stone. All of these things, I was the big guy who was, whatever, robust and etc. etc. And I fainted in our first lecture. And it's when people always say to me about my second book Marked for Death begins with quite a nasty murder, and you don't see the murder, but it describes what was done to him afterwards, and then you don't really see it again after that. That's as bad as it gets, but it was just to sort of set the tone of what this guy was willing to do. And so I've described this, and I've had people say to me afterwards, oh, you must be really nasty, you must get off on this sort of thing, etc. And I always say to them, no, the closest I came to this, I was out for the count in a room at 19 years old. And believe me, I never ever lived that down for the rest of my time at university. And my girlfriend at university was actually a medical student, so you can imagine it was even worse from her, because that's what they saw every day. I managed 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen any dead bodies, which I'm kind of disappointed about, which sounds really wrong, but that's what everyone does the degree for.
It's the selling point of the course. That's what I found anyway.
I've done some cool stuff, and we've looked at skeletons and done facial reconstruction and stuff like that. But yeah, it's bad to say that I'm disappointed, but I was.
Well, you've got to be honest about it. Why not? That's why. That's why these people. That's why people join these courses.
Yeah.
Certainly why I joined.
Yeah, lots more science than I realised though, hence having to retake a unit.
Yeah. The forensic, the science part of the title should have given that away.
It should have. Yeah, totally ignored that and said, nah, it'd be fine. Been a long time since
I haven't turned my phone off and I just had a beep, so I'm going to turn it off. Just in case you wonder why I'm looking down. There we are, done.
Well, I suppose we should go back to books, really.
Yeah, I guess so. Why not?
Well, I mean, you know, you're releasing a new book and stuff, so I suppose we should mention it in passing. If you were to take any of your main characters out for a meal, who would you choose and what would you ask them?
It would be Sarah Truman, unfortunately, because I married Sarah Truman, so it would have to be Sarah Truman. If you were to meet my wife, you would be looking at her. Michael Devlin, there's a certain amount of me in Michael Devlin. He is very exaggerated version of me in the sense that he's better in every single way. He's much more handsome. He's much slimmer. He's much more successful at his job. He's much better at his job in every way. He's the barrister I would like to be Michael Devlin. So in that level of wish fulfillment, I married Sarah Truman, who is the girl we meet in Killer Intent, and ultimately we discover Michael's fiance later in the books and the mother of his children. But interestingly, I wrote Sarah before I ever met Victoria. And the only difference is that Sarah's American and Victoria is not. However, Victoria lived in Manhattan for 10 years, and despite being very well spoken, very posh and sort of public school upbringing over here, she's as American as any American you'll ever meet. So even that difference between them isn't a huge difference. But they look exactly alike. I described Sarah I must have been 25 when I described Sarah, or 12, 25, 26 when I first wrote that character. No, it would have been, that's not true. I'd have been 22 because it was in the first, when I put it away for 10 years. So yeah, at 22 years old, I described Sarah, even down to the color of her eyes, which are unusual. And then when I was 35, I married someone who looked exactly like her and who is in very many ways, very like her. So in case Victoria ever sees this, the answer has got to be Sarah Truman.
Yeah. Despite writing what you know about, have you had to research anything, or what's the most interesting thing you found out, if you have?
Do you know what? Interestingly, I say write what you know. I thought I was doing that when I came up with the idea of Michael Devlin. But in Killer Intent, you see Michael in court for one chapter, and the fact that he's a barrister is what drags him in to the overall plot. But from that point onwards, it doesn't matter what he does. From that point onwards, he could be a dustman. So I was supposed to be writing what I know, and I didn't write what I know at all. He just happens to be a barrister, and it happens to be how he becomes connected to what's going on. The rest of it, no, is not what I know at all. But I spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland. I've got a lot of friends from Northern Ireland. I spent a lot of time there. I used to read a lot of military history. I used to read a lot of military facts and all of these things together. And just to be clear, I mean, hopefully you would know it's not a military it's not a boy book. They are, slightly macho, slightly James Bondy, I guess, or David Baldacci, but they are not sort of Annie McNabb. It's not Chris Ryan. It's not Bravo 20. But there is a little bit of, these guys some of them are ex-services. There's got to be some references to the services. But I knew all this stuff, and luckily I was able to write it without doing any research. And I then discovered, well, my mum read the book, and she said, Tony, this is really good. I enjoy this, but there's this point where you go into a load of detail about the statue of Achilles in Hyde Park, because someone's just running past it. I said, yeah, because it's my favorite statue. It's a really interesting story. She said, yeah, but 3 pages of a thriller about the statue of Achilles. So now it's a paragraph. And that tells me why I can't research, because that's something I did know a lot about. And I have a natural know-it-all tendency when I know a lot about something to want to tell you all about it. So some people get lost down a rabbit hole of research. I get lost down a rabbit hole of telling you my research. And so what I do instead is I took a decision to never research anything. I took a decision to guess about, I figure that the world has been run for a long time. We're all still here. And ultimately, things probably kind of work the way you would logically and sensibly think they work. And so I write everything in the way that I logically and sensibly think they work. And then when the book's written, I go back and research. So, and then I make the corrections I need to make. So I'll research the gaps and things like that. Because remember, this is not true, it's fiction. And what I write is heightened fiction. I don't write dark fiction, with the exception of the murders in Marked for Death. I don't write dark fiction for a very particular reason, Donna, is I live a much darker life in my day job than 99.9% of society. I have to see things that I would never even tell you about because they would haunt you. And I don't say that in a horrible way. I mean, they're just horrible things. So I don't want to write that stuff. I don't want to read that stuff. I do that for my day job. I like heightened. I like James Bond. I like Jack Reacher. I like a hero. I like Jason Bourne, and that's what I'm writing. And so therefore, there's a little bit less research in that straight away because it's not claiming to be utterly real. As long as it's real in the moment when you're reading it, as long as you're not taken out of the moment by thinking, well, that's unrealistic. I don't mind if I get a helicopter wrong. There's a helicopter in Marked for Death right at the end of Marked for Death. Because I do mind if I get a helicopter wrong, and I'll tell you this. I wanted to have a stealth helicopter for a particular reason in the finale of Marked for Death. I wanted a stealth helicopter. So I Googled stealth helicopter and I found one intentionally that had never gone into production. And the reason it had never gone into production was because it was too expensive. And I took the view, well, the United Nations is funded by everyone. It's probably infinitely wealthy. So if this hadn't gone into production, they could probably produce it. So there are 5 of them and they're owned by the United Nations and we have access to one. Someone, after the book came out, a year later, wrote to me saying, well, actually, that helicopter, when it was designed, was not designed to be a passenger. So they never made it. How are you correcting me about something that was only ever on paper? It was never made. So it does bother me to get them wrong because I did research it after the fact. But you can't go right. You can't be right for being wrong or be wrong for being right or whatever that expression is, because someone's always going to find a problem. But the answer is, I've gone on a massive tangent. The answer is, I write the way I think the world does work or probably works or should work. And then I'll research it to see if it does once I've written it. And luckily, and this gives me confidence in the human race, luckily, I haven't actually had to change that much so far. There was one very interesting, I think, interesting to me. I apologize if you all disagree with this. There was one I thought very interesting story about the unit that Joe Dempsey, my main intelligence agent, was a member of. Joe Dempsey's initially a member of the DDS, the Department of Domestic Security in Killer Intent. At the end of that book, he goes off to the UN in New York because I wanted to open the world a bit more. You know, if you've got the world, you can write a lot more than you can if it's just Britain. But his past before the DDS is he was in the SAS. And in fact, he was in a unit within the SAS, which is a sort of specialized upon specialized upon specialized. And it's just like 10 men who go off. And I guess they're not unlike the 00 section in Bond. And they go off and do this stuff. And I spoke to a friend who is very well known amongst ex-military and was fairly legendary in the SAS. After I'd written it, I let him read it. And he said to me, he said, how do you know about that? And I said, well, what are you talking about? How do you know about the unit? I said, well, I made it up. He said, yeah, but you've made up something that absolutely exists. He said, this is and in exactly the way you've described. So the world does work the way you logically and reasonably think it does. I think.
God, he must have been reading that thinking, oh my God.
Yeah, I think he was quite worried when I was. I didn't ask if he was in it.
No. Do you hide any secret jokes, messages, or Easter eggs in your books? Only a few people would understand.
Names, really. It is something that I might start doing a bit more as I get more confidence. I found with No Way to Die, I was going to hold that up again then for some reason. I found with No Way to Die, it's funnier. There's more humorous asides in it than there normally would be. I don't claim to have been a very funny writer for my first few books because I was so intent, and I was still learning and still getting it down. I think there's slightly more of me in the narration of No Way to Die, and I think there's slightly more of me in some of the exchanges, some of the dialogue exchanges, really. And the dialogue exchanges do have more humour in them, and I think hopefully that will carry on, and I'll be able to have more of myself in the books as I go forward, and I think there'll be more of that, what you're, Easter eggs and things like that. In terms of, I always try to include some references so that if someone's read the books in order, it will mean more. And I think if you read these books in order, you definitely get more out of them. But I also think very, very strongly and very intentionally that you can read any of them without having read the others. Much more difficult with No Way to Die because there is a real reference back to Killer Intent, and it's a major reference back. But I do think I've also written it in such a way that you'll totally get that without having read Killer Intent, but it will mean more if you have. So in terms of Easter eggs, to that extent, there are things that will mean more to readers of the series, but I think that's inevitable. I don't think that's so much a sort of a treasure hunt as just inevitable. But in terms of things that some people get up more than others, names, really. I'm terrible with names, Donna. I really struggle to come up with good names, and I've auctioned lots of names. I've raised quite a lot of money for charity by auctioning names. My wife and I and my law firm used to hold a ball called the Float Like a Butterfly Ball for Caldwell Children, and it was full of really rich people, and they used to pay thousands to put their names in my books. I mean, literally, we raised 15,000 for one name, and it was a great name. I would never, it's better than any name I'd have thought of. There's a character in No Way to Die called Bambi O'Rourke. It's my favourite name in any of my books. It's an auction name. So, and there are, I mean, I've got other people in there like Benjamin Grant. One of my best friends is called Grant Benjamin. So, and it's just, I'm just really quite rubbish with names. So the one thing that is in there is a lot of stolen names and a lot of auction names.
A tip that I've learned recently for names is to get a map and look at funny little village names, and either some of them you can give good guys' names, I find, but also you can find some wicked surnames just out of random village names.
Really?
It really works. Yeah.
Villages in the UK or just generally?
Well, I looked in the UK and I found some cool sounding ones. So yeah, I would say UK.
My problem is that I hear names and I think, oh, that's a great name. And occasionally I'll have the sense to write it down in my phone, and then I'll forget I've done it. And then I'll be looking for something else for work one day, 2 years later, and we'll find this great name that would have worked for a great character, and it's 2 years too late. So, I'm a bit of a magpie for names, and that's only because my imagination for names is rubbish, which is it's a strange thing actually, because I've got a very weird memory. This may sound boasting, but it's something you're born with, and therefore I don't think you can boast about what you're born with. It's like boasting for being tall or something. I was born. I have a very, very good memory. I mean, almost didactic. If I hear something, I remember it forever, and I can remember it word for word. And I mean, for example, I'll have trials that will last 3 months, and a judge at some point will say what the evidence was 2 months before, and I will tell him that's not right, the evidence was this, and I'll tell him it word for word, and the judge say, well, my note says this, what does your note say? And I say, well, I don't have a note because I can remember it, but I'm right. And this has happened about 5 times over my career, and every single time we go back to the tape and I'm right. And that's just there's not boasting, that's just luck. That's just it's like being tall when you play basketball. It's just having an advantage. But weirdly, and I think this might be connected to my inability to choose names, weirdly, I can't remember names. I remember everything that I hear, but I can't remember names. And so when I make a speech, I'll stand up and the main page of my speech will just be a line down the middle. And on this side will be the names that matter to me. And on this side will be the names that matter to the prosecution, just so I can remember when speaking to the jury what these people are called after like 3 months. It's just, it's very strange to have a memory that works the way mine works in that one way, and then to have such a fundamental flaw. So who knows? It may be connected to why I can't think of good names.
Yeah. I have a weird memory for numbers. I can remember numbers, birthdays, dates easily, but most other stuff, no, not so much.
We're going to find a way for that to work for forensic science.
Yeah, I'm not sure how, but yeah, maybe.
Numbers, there's bound to be numbers and science. It all goes in hand, doesn't it? I
Yeah,
say that
maths.
as somebody who got away from science and numbers as quickly as possible.
Well, so did I. What was I thinking? Honestly, I've asked myself this question many times. In the books you've written so far, what's been the most fun scene you've written and what's been the most difficult?
Well, that's a hard question. That's a really hard question. I don't know. Certain scenes, certain characters dying have always been the hardest to write. When you get to like a character and then you lose the character, and I don't often plan who's going to die. It's just that they just die, and that's always quite sad. And it's quite hard to do as well because you have to then get it right. And you know, the worst thing is when you get it wrong, and you know, and you've ruined the death scene by putting in just too much dialogue, or it's something cheesy or something. So it's really quite hard to just get that balance bang on, that it upsets the reader as much as it's upsetting you. And I think that's the key. If it's not really upsetting you as the writer, then you've got it wrong, because you know, these people are real. They're real in our minds, and if they're not real in our minds, then there's something wrong with it. In terms of, so they would be the hardest to write, I think. In terms of, actually, the very hardest to write are the things I don't write, which is sex. And even I've got one, I've written in my entire career one kissing scene. I mean, not just like a kiss on the lips or a pet goodbye or something, but one actual kissing scene. And it was in Power Play, my third book. And my wife read it and laughed at me for 3 hours. And then after 3 hours, I went and deleted it. And I mean, she just laughed at me constantly for 3 hours. And I'm not going to lie, it was rubbish. And so I don't write those things because they are the hardest to write. And I just don't write them. My characters, they want to have sex, they want to do some kissing, there's always a door they can close. And that's what will happen. I've got no interest in talking about someone's taut muscles and their fingers going along. It will just stick to, and then they went in there. And the next day was lovely. So yeah, there's that. They will be the hardest to write. Favorite to write is really, you know, I really like writing the background stuff. I really like writing exposition about a character's background in a way that's believable. So, I mean, with Dempsey, I wanted to, in Power Play, I wanted people to know a bit more about Dempsey, because for the first two books, because the first book, Killer Intent, is 50-50 Dempsey and Michael. But it's Michael's book because Dempsey's doing his job, whereas Michael is the one who's on the run and has to go home, pardon me, to his family, and you find out his past. So it's really Michael's book, although it's 50-50 between them. And then you get to Marked for Death, and Dempsey's not in it. He's at the end of a phone in one scene, and the rest of it's Michael's book, and it's a flat-out legal thriller, serial killer thriller. And the result of that is people after Marked for Death regarded it as the Michael Devlin series, and it was never supposed to be. It was all, that's why I say all that stuff about the Killer Intent universe. I know it seems a bit Marvel, but I just want people to realize it's not the Michael Devlin series. It's slightly more Joe Dempsey, really, because ultimately I'll get a lot more books out of an international intelligence agent than I will out of a barrister getting himself in scrapes. I do that job for a living. It's not only rare, it doesn't happen. So it's you know, there's only so many things I can write. I mean, it's like Bergerac. How many people can die in Jersey? Or Midsummer Murders. How many people can die in Midsummer? Basically anything with John Nettles in it. But I mean, the reality is I will get more books out of him, but it's a mixed series. And so in the third book, I just took it on myself to really, I wanted the right reader to really get to understand a lot more about Dempsey and to really like Dempsey and to have, you know, to love Dempsey. I want them to love Dempsey the way I love Dempsey. And so, yeah, that's not going to happen immediately. He lives in my head, but I wanted to get down that way and, you know, start down that route. So I created a scene. I created a character actually for that purpose. Eden Grace, who's a Secret Service agent and spends time with Dempsey. Eden Grace is gay, so there's no sexual tension between them. Him and the girl. There's no sexual tension between them, which I thought was very important. And then I had Dempsey was on a painkiller, and he needed something done. So he had pain, and because he was on the painkiller, he was more open than he would normally be, and he was less modest and less Dempsey. And concocting that as a mechanism, those two things, the lack of sexual tension was key, because otherwise you spend the whole time waiting for them to kiss, and I didn't want that to happen. And then you've got that the lack of the sexual tension, and then the painkiller, etc., so that Dempsey can have a chat and learn things about Dempsey in a way that's believable. Because why would he just sit there and tell her stuff if it wasn't all in that way? And that was really interesting to write. Not least because I found out loads about Dempsey that I didn't know when I started writing it. So, oh, really? Your dad was a right bastard, and I didn't know. So that was fun.
If you were to team up any of your characters with any other fictional characters, who would you choose?
I would certainly have Dempsey team up with Jack Reacher. So at some point, Jack Reacher could get shot and stop writing Jack Reacher books, and people would instantly think that Dempsey was some sort of a sequel and start buying them. But that's probably just completely cynical. Who would I team them up with? There's a lot of guys out there. I really like Mason Cross books with Carter Blake. I'd quite like, I think he's different enough from Dempsey that they would complement each other. Carter Blake is very, very much the everyman, even though he's very good at his job, skilled at his job. Whole idea is he disappears into a crowd, where Dempsey is sort of big, strapping, doesn't disappear into any crowd. And I think they would complement each other quite well. I'd quite like someone to team up with Sarah Truman. Actually, I'm trying to get myself to a point where I've got a Sarah Truman story, because she plays her part in them, but it's an increasingly smaller part. And in fact, Eden Grace comes back in No Way to Die, as almost now is kind of Dempsey's sidekick, which wasn't the plan. I actually planned to kill her in Power Play and then didn't, and she's now sort of my series secondary character for Dempsey, which is crazy how that happens. I mean, they just take on a life of their own. But I'd quite like to have Sarah come out of Michael's shadow a bit, so I'd quite like to see her team up with someone. I'm not sure who it would be. Possibly she might work quite well with Amos Decker, David Baldacci's Amos Decker. I think they would work quite well together, but I'd have to get her to America to make that work, and then I'd have to get Baldacci to work with me.
If you were to be a fictional killer, how would you kill your victims?
It depends, doesn't it? It depends what you're going for. You're going to be, because you're fictional. Are you trying to kill somebody for this just because they deserve to be murdered, and that's the only murder you'll ever do, and you want to get away with it? In that circumstance, the way you would kill them would be in such a way that you would get away with it. You would, number one, give your phone to someone else and tell them to phone the people occasionally in your phone book. That's the key to getting away with a murder. Give your phone to someone else, tell them to be 50 miles away, and make sure they're using your phone. Because people don't bring their phones now when they go and do things. They've at least learned that much, or they turn their phones off. No one turns their phones off in real life. So if your phone's gone off and it happens to correspond to a murder, you probably did the murder. So give the phone to someone else, get them to use the phone while you're off doing what you're doing. Obviously make sure it's your brother or someone who's not going to grass on you. So that's basically how I would protect myself when carrying out the murder. In the manner in which I would do the murder, it would depend very much upon who I'm killing. Someone who deserves, some real horrible people who might deserve to die. You might want to do it in a way that gives you some sort of feeling of catharsis. If it was something for money, then that's got to just be a very quick kill, isn't it? And if you're doing it for money, and gunshots probably best avoidable because of residue. But a knife in the right place, and then walk off. But beware of CCTV.
Yeah. Although GSR isn't in itself a very good forensic tool, I've discovered.
No, it's but it's very easy to contaminate. Very easy to contaminate. My old head of chambers did the Barry Balsara case, the Giordano murder case. And I mean, that was shocking how contaminated that all was. That they convicted that poor man based upon a spec that came almost certainly from one of the people that arrested him. I've had similar things myself, just not quite so well known.
Yeah, we still get taught about that as well. That's how shocking it was, you know, and how big a miscarriage of justice it was.
It was. Well, the police went and got the, I mean, what they did, and this is not a criticism of the police, like most defence barristers, well, like most sensible defence barristers, I have a huge amount of respect for the police. I think 90% of them are fantastic, 95% of them are fantastic, 5% of them not so, and when a police is not so, that's not good. But generally, they are working very, very hard. They're doing a very good job under a huge amount of stress and with massively just insignificant resources, and it's a very difficult job. However, there is a tendency with very high profile murders for them to have to grab someone. There's a tendency that there's got to be an arrest, and it's because of pressure from the press. Yeah, and there's a tendency amongst some of them to cave to that pressure. Generally, not at all in most cases, but high profile murders. So you look at Colin Stagg, my old head of chambers did that case as well. We look at Barry Balsara, my old head of chambers did that case. You look at the landlord that was arrested in the murder down in Bristol a few years ago. Weirdly enough, my old head of chambers did that case too. It happens a lot. It happens an awful lot.
Yeah. I find the Innocence Project in America fascinating as well, but that's just, I mean, that's racist as well as injustice.
Yeah. Do you know what I'll tell you what actually offends me, Doc, and it does offend me, is the way in which people who know nothing about this job, people who know nothing about the police, and I say this as a defence barrister, the people who conflate the British police with the American police. The British police and the American police are utterly different, and historically they come from a totally different place. The American police, and this is absolutely true, the American police began as slave catchers. That's where the American police service comes from. They were slave catchers. They are built inherently on racism. The British police are not. Yes, there was racism. Yes, there was institutional racism. There was societal racism. All of these things existed. But when you look at what happens in America, and then they immediately behave as if that must apply to us as well. They must apply to the British police as well. It doesn't. Are there problems? Yes, absolutely, 100% there are. But the American police and the British police are not comparable, because historically they're just called the same thing. But historically they come from a completely different place. They come from peacekeepers under Robert Peel, and they come from slave catchers after, well, I think it was it slave catchers? Well, yeah, it was slave catchers. So it was before 1865. So I mean, it's just not the same thing at all, and it's very frustrating when you see people who don't know this stuff behaving as if problems with one must exist with the other. Doesn't mean problems don't exist. They're not the same problems.
No.
How are we for time? Because I know we have to be under an hour.
We're fine, I think, although I didn't actually look when we started. There we go, that's better. And if you were to be killed in a book, who would you like to solve your murder?
Who do I like? Who would I like to solve my murder? I'd like someone really clever to solve my murder. Sherlock Holmes. Just because, you know what, I want someone to solve it quick. Yeah, get some what's it called? Get some closure for the family. So I want Sherlock Holmes to step in, and then I want someone to hit him for being rude afterwards. But
yeah, bless him. And incidentally, I think Arthur Conan Doyle had something to do with establishing forensics, some sort of forensic soil or plants or something. I can't remember. I should know that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. He was in many ways a nutter. Yeah, his belief in fairies was very interesting, but his belief in seances, and he was very good friends with Houdini, but they were at odds with each other. He very much believed in seances. Houdini very much believed they were all a scam, but they were very close friends, and they used to go to them together, with one believing, one trying to expose it.
Yeah, interesting times, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's characters at any point.
When you're editing your books, what's your most overused word or phrase?
Changes. It changes for every book, because it will be identified on one book and I'll be very aware of it. But then I will then have some sort of a crutch for the next one. The last one, I think there was an awful lot of staring. A lot of people were staring at a lot of people. And it was, and I was reading through it thinking, there's nobody blink in this place. Everyone is staring. I mean, it's like a bunch of chameleons. And it's really noticeable. So my most recent one, Pippa is my editor, who is fabulous. And I think she had to remove a whole lot of staring from the most recent book. I think first book, my most overused phrase was "and yet." And so I'm still really conscious of "and yet." And I do use them occasionally, intentionally, because it's like, no, there should be a few. I'm trying to, it's like weeding yourself off. It's like if you were a smoker. It's like, no, I don't have to give up completely. I can have a couple. And so there are a few "and yets" in there. But yes, the staring was the most recent one.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's creepy as well.
Yes, I mean, loads of staring, and I don't regard myself as a starer, but it was, in fact, staring. I did a trial yesterday. I had a trial that was supposed to last 3 days, and it lasted a day because I cross-examined a witness who I'd noticed was staring, and I watched her staring at the defendant, and she was working for a planning authority. Basically, he'd been allegedly dumping waste on his ground, £2.5 million worth of waste when he wasn't supposed to, and so they'd arrest him for breach of what's called a stop notice. And she was staring at. She was the inspector from the council, and it was just daggers. And so I looked at her, and so I was watching her, and I just thought, you know what? She hates him. She absolutely hates this man. And if she hates him, she's going to do anything she can to get him convicted. So I basically gave her a couple of options that made it sound really bad for him, that she didn't know we all knew couldn't possibly be true, and she agreed with them. Yes, he did do that. Oh yes, absolutely, he did do that. And we'd already demonstrated by a previous witness that none of that could have happened, which therefore completely undermined the case, and the judge threw the whole case out. But I mean, so that's my staring. The point I'm making is staring is not a good thing. It's staring for me. My instinct on staring is I can do something with this. And yet, in my most recent book, it's a lot of staring. It's not there anymore. I hasten to add, you can buy the book, you won't see a lot of staring.
Good to know. So when you're not working and you're not writing, how do you like to spend your time?
It's rare that I'm not working or not writing. I do a job that is fairly all-encompassing anyway, and then the writing I have to try to fit in. Well, when I do have free time, I like to spend it with Victoria and Joseph. Joseph, my son, who is 3. We had him when we were 40. Well, I was 40. Victoria will tell you she was 29. We had him when we were 40. And so I make the most of that because we had him late, and there was a long time that we didn't have him, and we waited for him for a long time. So I like to spend as much time with him as possible, stories, reading, playing, etc. I like to go, I train. I do a lot of, depends on how busy I am. If I've got time, I train. If I don't have time, I don't train. My weight goes up and down like you wouldn't believe. And was it Life of Brian, up and down like the Assyrian Empire? But as a result of that, so I'm normally either in extremely good shape or extremely bad shape, depending upon my workload. But if I do have time, I like to train. I like to box. I like to lift weights, and that's about it.
Who was your first celebrity crush?
2 really. Olivia Newton-John as Sandy in Grease, although I didn't know it was one. The one that I knew it was one was Catwoman, Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman in Batman Returns, and probably the biggest one that would remain the biggest one, apart from a single scene of Cameron Diaz's career, when Cameron Diaz walks into the bank at the very beginning of Mask. That's it. That's like, right, fair enough. So they've made perfection. Never ever was so lovely ever again. So it remains Catwoman as Michelle Pfeiffer, apart from that one scene.
Yeah, I get that. Catwoman is a popular choice.
Yeah, if I was 10 years older, it would probably be Carrie Fisher in the gold bikini as in Friends, but I missed that.
Yeah, I can usually age people by their celebrity crushes as well. male and female. It's quite funny. Sort of, you've got Debbie Harry, and then you've got like Catwoman, and yeah. So I can sort of, in decades at least, anyway. It's
I
fun.
think Catwoman would have been. I think I'd have been about 12, which I think is just about the right age to understand what the crush is. Yeah, Olivia Newton-John couldn't really get what that was about, but I can now, obviously.
Yeah, she was hot, to be fair.
Yeah, it's quite interesting now watching my son at 3 when he sees certain girls on TV or even in restaurants. I mean, we had a waitress came over to us with an Italian accent, and he's just like, and suddenly we're not there. It's quite interesting to see that, because obviously, you know, sexuality is a a complicated thing, but to see it visible so young is quite interesting.
Yeah. Wow. If a genie was to give you 3 wishes, what would you wish for?
Very difficult. It's very difficult. I quite like to have all of Superman's powers. I'm not going to lie. I grew up a Superman obsessive. There is a reason I changed my name when I was writing to Tony Kent. It was the closest thing I get to being Superman. And so, yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I'd want one of those. And I would like to be a regular bestseller. And as for the 3rd wish, I'll keep that in my back pocket until it was time to use it. Because frankly, if you've got Superman's powers and you're writing bestsellers, you don't need much more.
No, well, something to crop up, I suppose.
Exactly. Back pocket for that reason.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. What was I just going to ask you? Oh, if you're able to travel to any period of time, either forwards or backwards, where would you like to
go? Almost certainly. Can we assume that I can speak the language? Because it'd be rubbish if you couldn't. I'd like to go to Judea in probably 32 AD, have a chat to Jesus Christ and find out what's going on. Just see what that's all about. I've raised a Catholic. I'm Irish Catholic, so therefore you're Irish Catholic, you are always a Catholic, no matter what you may or may not believe in. So I'm culturally very Catholic. When I was 13, I met Pope John Paul II in a private audience and had a mass, etc. And I met Pope Benedict in all of this business. So very Catholic. I don't particularly believe in any of it, but I do believe it's a wonderful thing. I believe that it's a very important thing. It's a great way to raise your children, etc., etc. I believe, again, it could be something that's very terribly abused. But I would like to know the basis of it, because I do know a lot of the history of Jesus, of the actual Jesus person, and the impact of other mythologies onto the Jesus myth, if I can call it that without being excommunicated. But the Jesus story has such parallels to Mithras and to Osiris and to Dionysus and Bacchus and all these. There's a huge load of parallels, the dying and resurrecting God-man theory. And I'd quite like to just know what it was all about. So I think then.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But as I say, I'd have to be able to speak the language.
Yeah. We assume that you can speak the language, and usually that you're rich. Otherwise, it's not a very good life to, especially if you're going back in time. If you're poor,
I thought I was just popping back.
Yeah, just for a day or whatever, an hour.
If I was going back for any length of time, I think I'd go to the 1950s. They got antibiotics, they cured polio, and it was pretty good. If you're a white man.
Yeah, that does. Yeah.
Less so if you're not, but at the end of the day, I am. So.
Yeah, that's it. Can't help. That's how we were born. So can't change it. So are you working on anything at the moment, and do you know what you're going to do next?
I'm working on book 5. It's a Michael and Joe Dempsey book. So back to Killer Intent was Michael and Joe Dempsey for sort of 50-50. As I said, Power Play was very much Dempsey's book, sort of 80-20. Book 5 will be 50-50 again. And we are going to have Michael Devlin will be representing a alleged war criminal at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And there will be a witness who is all important to winning. And someone has to go and get him. And that someone will be Joe Dempsey. And funnily enough, given what we were just talking about, there will be a certain amount of it. It's almost a road trip. The Dempsey part is almost a road chase, not a road trip, but a chase from Rome to The Hague. because I think we'll have I've got a friend in the Vatican, and I'm going to be popping over there to get a tour in the new year, because I think we're going to have a kidnap from the Vatican will be a big part of the story.
Awesome. That sounds wicked.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
but I really need to get going on it though, because I wanted to do this November writing thing that everyone does, and I'd signed up for it and I was all key to go and ready, and then my day job went crazy. Sometimes you just can't account for it, and it went insane, and so I have not written a word in November, and I'm going to Mauritius for Christmas for 2 weeks, and I'm now going to have to try and hit 2,000 words a day while I'm there. But to be honest, I'll be on a beach, so right? What else am I going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Or, just swim and chill and stuff.
I'm not good at that.
No.
I'm not good at this chilling business. I like to get my base burn on my first day, get nice and red, and then type.
Well, you may be relieved to know I don't have any more questions for you, unless you think there's anything I haven't asked you that you want to tell us.
No, just to remind everyone that No Way to Die is out tomorrow. If this is going out today, this is out tomorrow. It's out on Thursday, the 18th. I'm doing a launch event tomorrow afternoon at 1 with Hillingdon Libraries on Facebook. This has, just in case you need a recommendation for it, if I've not sold it well enough or I've sold the series well enough, it's one of the thrillers of the month in the Sunday Times. And yesterday, Times Crime Club have also declared it one of the picks of the week. So it's doing quite well in terms of reviews at the moment, which is a relief. So if those sort of things matter to you, then you can take that as a recommendation and hopefully buy the book.
And if people want to buy it, and if people want to find out more about you, where can they do so?
They can do so at my website to learn about me, not to buy the book. I know that is coming. We're having it revamped, but at the beginning of the year. TonyKent.net. Is it not TonyKentWrites.net? I think it's TonyKent.net. You can get me on Twitter at TonyKent_writes. Also Instagram, TonyKent_writes. Facebook, TonyKent-author. Or in fact, I think there's also another page that's Tony Kent Writes. They're all fairly connected. And I have a YouTube channel that's got quite a lot of stuff on there, lots of interviews. Haven't touched it myself for a year, but I'm about to start doing that again. But there's lots of material on there from last year. Again, Tony Kent Writes on YouTube. And if you want to buy the book, then you can do so at Waterstones, at all good bookshops, or there is, I think, still a few of the Goldsborough Books special editions left. But I do think it's very few, so you might need to get there quick if you are sold or going, I'm getting one of those.
Well, fabulous. Well, thank you very much.
Donna, thanks very much for inviting me. It's lovely to talk to you.
You too.